Hi everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you'd like to have a seat. The great thing about this pavilion is there is coffee. So hopefully that will attract some folks. It looks like there's even some food over there. That's pretty good. So please have a seat. Oh, speaking of that, grab those. Oh no, are those yours?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Those are for the speakers.
Don't take the speaker's water. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I know it's a long slog, lots of events, lots of tracking negotiations. I'm Tracy Farrell. I'm the Regional Director for IUCN in North America. And you can see from our title that you are in the event, Welcome to Nature-Based Solutions by Design. So hopefully this is where you're meant to be. If not, please stay anyway. So a bit of context on what nature-based solutions are. This is a term that was coined a little while ago, but has since been endorsed by the UN Environmental Assembly in 2022. And by way of quick definition, nature-based solutions are defined as actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems. So this is only the first part. The second part is that these different ecosystems have to address an actual challenge or problem. So social, environmental, economic challenges. And there's also a bit of adaptation in there. So these solutions need to adapt to the context of change. And at the end of the day, these need to result in benefits to people, ecosystem services, resilience, and also biodiversity. So luckily, I think we're getting better and better at making these real in practice, and that's what this session is about. So you're going to hear from a series of speakers who will walk you through some actual live examples. What does this look like in practice? And also a bit of a flavor of how other disciplines have really made this concept much more robust and actionable, and in particular, the landscape architecture discipline. So with that in mind, we're going to start with our first speaker, and I've actually asked the speakers to introduce themselves so that I don't spend too much time on the bios bit. So we're going to have the initial 3 speakers and then a moderated panel discussion. So we'll turn the floor over to Liette.
Thank you. So my name is Liette Vassar. I'm from Brock University, a UNESCO Chair on Community Sustainability, but I'm also the Deputy Chair of the Commission on Ecosystem Management at IUCN. So as you probably know already, the nature-based solution was put forward during the through the Resolution 69, which required to prepare the definition of nature-based solution, which you see here, that is to action to protect, sustainability manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystem in ways to address societal challenges. So it's really the working landscape that we're talking at that point, and to adaptively provide both human well-being and protection of biodiversity and conservation. So it's in both cases. And you have here, through these little icons, the different type of societal challenges that we may have to deal with. During the resolution, there were the 8 different principles that were put forward. And these principles became gradually, through the work that happened until 2020, the development of the assessment, the global standard for nature-based solution. And these are 8 criteria that needs to be met if you want to have your intervention to become a nature-based solution, NBS, as we say all the time. And it's important to understand that this is a process. This is not that necessarily your intervention on one day, it becomes an NBS. It can be something that you work over time. The criteria are very, and I will show some them more in detail, but really you can have, at the beginning probably 4 of them, but you work to be able to have the other 4 over time. So this is not something that is necessarily fixed from the first day. So it's a process to think about it that way. So the 8 criteria that are important here are first a societal challenge. So you have to first define that. Then planning at scale. So that's very important, that you understand your landscape and where it's going. You have to consider nature, so the importance of biodiversity. You have to look at the economy, so it has to also be economically viable and also beneficial for the livelihoods of the people living there. There's a question of society, so there's a social acceptance, but also the importance of the involvement of all actors. So that means stakeholders and right holders, so including women, men, elderly, youth, indigenous people, and to the governance of the structure of the NBS. There are trade-offs, however, and this is important to understand. I'll explain a bit more the trade-offs in a few seconds. Then we have that the management of this, the NBS can be adaptive. So adaptive management is important. Monitoring, reporting, and we have been talking a lot about that here at COP15. And finally, mainstreaming. So how to make sure that it's outscaling the project to a higher level so that more people can benefit from this the intervention. So again, we have all these 8 criteria. And if you look at the logo of NBS, it's really showing that we have societal challenges. We need an ecosystem-based approach, which includes restoration, climate change adaptation, and others, to be able to deal with these societal challenges, which can be in terms of human well-being, and also the importance of conservation of biodiversity. I'm just going to explain a little bit some of these criteria, okay? I cannot do all of them because we don't have the time here, but just to give you a bit of a sense of the type of important indicators that each of them can have. So here you have the criterion 1, which is related to effectively address societal challenges. And you have within that 3 indicators. The first one relates more to what is the pressing societal challenges that you have to deal with. The second is more looking at how it is understood. So you have to carefully understand the problem. And then finally, it has to identify what will be the human well-being outcomes. So what are the outcomes for the society of doing this intervention? The second is criterion 2, which is design of the NBS that is informed at scale. And again, 3 indicators. The first one relates to a balance, if you want, and the interaction between the economy, society, and ecosystem. The second look more at the design in terms of the synergies across sectors, because if you're working in a local, working landscape, you may have several economic sectors, you may have different societies, different people, so you have to look at that this way. Finally, the third one is a question of identification of the risks and how to manage these risks that is happening there. Criterion number 5, it's probably the one that is often one of the most challenged with the criterion number 6. And it's a question here that you have 5 indicators. And this relates really to the question of inclusive, transparent, and empowering governance for the population that is part of this NBS intervention. So it goes in terms of grievance resolution. So you need to have a resolution, conflict resolution mechanisms, because there may be some that happen, because there's a question of, at one point, trade-offs. There's a question of also respecting the different cultures and equality. The third one is the question of knowing your stakeholder that are going to be directly or indirectly impacted. They may be within your landscape, but they may be adjacent to another surrounding ecosystem. The fourth one is the respects of the rights and interests of people. And finally, the last one is going to look at what could be the impact of your intervention on another ecosystem, on another landscape. So to know what can be happening there. Number 6 is related to the trade-offs. So trade-offs in terms of achieving the primary goals, but also probably the multiple other goals or objectives or benefits that can come from this NBS intervention. Trade-offs can be very important. So there are 3 indicators, and they have to be acknowledged. The rights, usage, and access to these different lands and resources have to be respected. And finally, the last one is making sure to have safeguards. And the safeguards, especially in terms that they have to be mutually agreed through the trade-offs. Okay, so that means that the governance has to be transparent, inclusive, and lead to a lot of the possibility of discussion. So there are key messages. I'm just going to go very quick around them. So it's really a question of conservation interventions, so preservation of biodiversity, question of transdisciplinary knowledge. So it's not only one science, one discipline, one sector that can deal with that. It's a question of having multiple values for nature and culture. It's a nature positive solution because it's really net gain, which is criterion number 3. Importance for high quality intervention. Rethinking finance at that point. Making sure you understand the trade-offs. Provide the best approach for low carbon in many cases, so it can have different functions, if you want, in terms of NBS. And finally, making sure to avoid potential direct or indirect impact within the working landscape, but also surrounding landscape. And we have to be careful. There's a lot of nature-based something. So nature-based solution, we have defined it. Some people are also talking about, for example, nature-derived solutions. So they're inspired from nature, but they are not nature-based solution. There are some also that are nature-inspired solution, especially with architectures that are kind of mimicking natural world, but they are not nature-based solution. And finally, nature-climate solution, like planting monoculture for carbon sequestration. That would not be considered nature-based solution because it doesn't help biodiversity, and it doesn't most of the time help necessarily the community that will live there. So we have to be very careful about these components. So thank you very much, and I will pass now to Colleen.
Thanks, Liette. So I'm going to speak to you about the need for partnerships to advance nature-based solutions. And I think why I think partnering between the IUCN and landscape architects is one of the most effective ways to implement NBS in undeveloped and developing landscapes. Here in Canada, the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, of which I am a past national president, is a professional voice of nearly 3,000 landscape architects from across the country, including in our high north. The International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA, represents over 77 national professional associations in 5 world regions throughout the globe. So what's a landscape architect? I'm anticipating that many of you don't know. Well, neither myself nor my colleague Jane have a pickup truck with a tree in the back of it out in the parking lot. Our profession, like many, is very varied in the scope and skills engendered in every individual. But all of us plan, design, and manage at the interactions between the natural and the built environment. Landscape architects undergo a minimum of 4 years training at the bachelor degree level and 3 years for a first professional degree at the master's level. If, like me, you have a degree in an aligned profession. So a little about me. I'm a marine and aquatic ecologist, which might seem an unusual combination, but I've worked for over 50 years in this field, and it's been highly productive. Oh, yeah, sorry, there we go. I'm basically a large landscapes LA with a career spent mostly on industrial and institutional landscapes and on the restoration of degraded and contaminated landscapes, and also a lot in the water, aquatic and marine. Others in my profession work in urban design. They work on agricultural landscapes with disadvantaged communities, on parks and protected areas at all scales. Landscape architects as a profession have the skills and the capacity to understand dynamic and changing forces that alter landscapes, that shape landscapes, and that order ecosystems. Our profession is grounded in the need to design and to build with nature. Through our professional associations, we advocate for our members on issues such as urban design, urban renewal, reconciliation, conservation, cultural heritage, climate change, and sustainability of both built and natural environments. We're terrific communicators, and we're even better at convincing decision makers that our vision is the right vision. IFLA has identified these priority global issues of immediate importance to the profession worldwide that we know we share with the IUCN and with conservation organizations everywhere. Most of these issues are indelibly linked one to the other. Landscape architects know that to combat climate change, to ensure ecological sustainability, and to sustain biodiversity, we need to work at all the scales that matter, from the large landscapes that provide clean air, clean water, to tiny, tiny inner city spaces and pieces of green. Scales matter when you try to sustain nature. Even tiny plots can be linked together to provide important ecological corridors, as well as healing green spaces for humans. Working with nature takes many forms, whether it's watersheds managed to provide that clean water, a neighborhood cooled by urban canopy, a green roof, a tiny wetland, or a welcoming shore. All bits and pieces of the natural environment are important, no matter where they're located, and all of them are assets within development projects. Working with the environment so closely, landscape architects understand the complexity of skills needed to achieve the best benefits to both nature and to society. We know it takes more than one profession, more than one subject matter expert, if we're to fully and effectively implement nature-based solutions. Interdisciplinary teams, not multidisciplinary teams, are needed to harvest the knowledge and creativity of all participants to develop collective and insightful solutions, to foster and effect innovation. Interdisciplinary teams need leaders who respect the skills of team members, ensure the early integration of all perspectives, and enable those transparent collaborative relationships with affected communities that Liette spoke about. At IFLA, volunteer landscape architects have been working hard to reduce carbon footprints, to offer alternative visions for how communities work to protect and enhance nature. In 2017, our community ratified a global accord on adaptation for a changing world. This simple document challenged each and every one of us to question whether their work promotes and advances three principles important to the world of today and the world of tomorrow. Be resilient, be transformative, be sustainable. In 2019, the Federation declared a climate and biodiversity emergency, noting that the stresses already placed on a natural world by human society are only made worse as the planet warms. In 2020, IFLA continued on the path and endorsed a declaration strengthening our focus on sustaining ecological and community health, because we know that both of these are interdependent. IFLA and our profession has long been committed to advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and last year the International Federation challenged us all to ratify this climate action agreement, which builds on the SDGs and offers 6 actual statements that define our profession's work to sustain ecosystems and to fight to ensure the well-being of societies in all parts of the globe. Now, for a lot of my career, more traditional managers were often heard to tell me I needed to calm down. There's no time, there's no money, no interest in taking a different path. I needed to focus, and most of the focus was, of course, on the economy. The plan then, and is largely still today, to conduct business as usual. The natural environment was there to be shaped for human use. Most days, my life felt a bit like this. The hard part was realizing that after 35 years, we'd made some inroads towards sustainability, but not enough. So I left and did a PhD on the health of coasts and oceans here in Canada, and I got engaged doing climate science while I was doing the PhD. I want you to look at this. This is where I see the problems. On the left is a map of where the highest risks and threats to habitats and species are in our country. On the right is a map of the developing landscapes of Canada. Now, it's an easy correlation to see. So if we're going to make real progress on using nature-based solutions to advance biodiversity, we need to do it now. For too many years, on too many spaces, only lip service has been paid to working with nature. Now we have the opportunity to advance nature-based solutions, even while climate change is altering our weather patterns and trashing the norms for temperatures, precipitation, and wind. We need to change the way we think, and we need to change how we create and manage communities and industries. We need to work with nature and not expect nature to work with us. Business as usual is still the dominant practice in most of our world. Landscape architects continue to face barriers and oppositions to new ways of thinking and to the changes necessary to implement nature-based solutions. In many communities and organizations, existing practices and policies can actively work against a new approach to nature. Low bid tendering processes that began in the 80s have really ensured that planners and designers don't have the time to be creative or innovative. It's best to just use a cookie-cutter design and get the project out the door and on the ground. Clearly, nature-based solutions need leaders who understand the benefits of working with our environment at all scales. In many jurisdictions and offices, like Liette noted, the definition for a nature-based solution is being reduced to what architects call greenwashing. A few plants, a few trees here and there. Oops. Back one last words. It's becoming increasingly clear to us that the old ways are not the good ways, and that working with nature may be the only practical way toward a sustainable future, and the best hope for society struggling today with severe weather, conflict, and disease. Now, this is our time. And these are our challenges. They're large challenges that require of us transformative innovation. Our world and our communities depend on us to provide leadership for the future, not to follow in the mistaken paths of the past. Now is the time to reach beyond our traditional networks, to develop supportive partnerships with organizations and individuals with whom we share a common goal and a common understanding. Landscape architects in all walks of life could greatly benefit from the support of the IUCN and other conservation agencies when we face that mayor and council or that industrial board, and we advocate to protect a wetland or sustain a forest or woodlot. We believe the IUCN can greatly benefit from our knowledge and skills so that together we can actually make the application of ecosystem approaches to planning and design the accepted path forward for human society. So thank you all for your kind attention, and my good friend and colleague Jane is now going to take you just a few steps further into our world.
Oops. Works better with this. So good morning, everybody. My name is Jane Welsh, and I am a landscape architect as well, and I have a degree as well in planning. And I work for the City of Toronto, where I lead a team responsible for setting out environmental policy for land use decisions. And over my career, I have developed innovative policy with the city, focused on creating a more sustainable urban environment, including responsibility for the Toronto Green Standard, Green Roof Bylaw, and the biodiversity strategy, as well as the new environment and climate change policies. And in my volunteer work, I'm chair of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects Committee on Climate Adaptation. So I'm going to speak to you a bit today about the work we are doing in the City of Toronto to bring nature back to the city and the role of landscape architects in that work.
So as you may know, Toronto's a big city, and you might think it's a bit of an oxymoron with biodiversity. How do you get biodiversity in a big city like where the land is all developed? And we're the 4th largest city in North America, and we continue to grow at a very rapid pace by design. We approve about 22,000 units a year in the city, and this map shows the estimated future population of all the residential units currently in the pipeline were built out. We do anticipating adding about 700,000 new residents over the next 30 years. And like a lot of urban centers, so we're an inland city, so the effects of climate change will not be as severe as many other cities in the world. We do anticipate that our weather will look very different in 20 years, more heat waves and more extreme weather events. One aspect that we're concerned about is the strong correlation, as you can see in this map here, between income and surface temperature. The hotter areas indicated in red being where there's also lower income, which means there's a need to ensure our public space, our parks and streets are being designed with nature for resilience and stormwater management and shade and beauty and providing respite. So the origins of the name Toronto come from Tis Toronto, and it's a Mohawk word, and it means where there are trees in the water. And as articulated in our biodiversity strategy, this describes a deep-rooted and meaningful relationship in natural stewardship between the people and the place. And one of the key ingredients of bringing nature into the city is honoring that relationship through the protection of natural spaces. And Toronto does have a strong legacy of forward-thinking public policy, way back till 1943 when we introduced a master plan. And then again in 1976 when landscape architect Anne Winston Spurn produced this plan for the Toronto waterfront. So we have a number of tools that we use to both require and to shift thinking and change how we think about and how we design and build the city. We've got rules, of course, they're the bottom line, right? And then we also make investments in capital projects and provide incentives for higher performing development. And also an important ingredient is building advocacy and socializing expectations. So our official plan is a statutory document that guides land use in the city. It sets out a vision, envisions Toronto as a city with a connected system of natural features and ecological functions that support biodiversity and contribute to civic life. And we recently updated our official plan, and we have a new one or a new section on climate and resilience and environment that includes mapping water resources and identifying additional environmentally significant areas. And this map shows how we protect natural heritage within the system. Toronto's actually quite blessed. We have a number of ravines where there is remnants of the original natural system still in place. So another tool that we use that's different and a bit innovative is to require performance measures for new development. So since it came into effect in 2010, there's been over 3,000 new developments required to apply minimum sustainable performance measures. And these include things around biodiversity. So you have to have biodiverse green roofs. You have to include only native species when you're planting adjacent to a ravine, 50% anywhere else. You're not allowed to plant any invasive species on new developments. And we also protect birds through requiring glazing on the glass as we are on a migratory pathway. We also have a green roof bylaw. It's been in place since 2010 as well. We've had 1,000 new green roofs in the city. This one is designed by Janet Rosenberg on, whoops, I'm too far ahead of myself, or not quite. There's the green roof, designed by landscape architect Janet Rosenberg. And this shows how the roofscape is changing in Toronto over the past 10 years. So it does help with habitat. It absorbs stormwater, it reduces some energy use, and it just makes the city more beautiful. If you're in a tower, which we have many of in Toronto, you look down and you see the sea of green versus a sea of black roofs. So really what we try to do at the city is about a lot of shifting perspectives. So we're trying to introduce new and innovative policy and setting out expectations that perhaps we don't have authority to require, but by doing that we shift the thinking. And the hope is that we eventually make what we're introducing as policy or voluntary measures, that they become the new rules and they become the new minimum, and we continue to do that. We also have to think strategically about where we invest in the city, and these are two strategies, the ravine and biodiversity strategies. I can share it on the right page. And it's very important in terms of the quality and health of our ravines. It's very critical in terms of climate resilience. It's critical in terms of maintaining the biodiversity that we do have. And we did do an estimate on the ecosystem services they provide, and it's $822 million every year, which is huge. And that gives us a bit of credibility in terms of supporting and investing in them. We also provide a refund for those buildings that are built to higher standards, and it can be quite substantive. And landscape architects have long been the architects of nature, as Colleen was describing. We're trained to design at many scales, understand the capacity of the land, and how that works with the dynamic forces of nature, rain, snow, wind, and sun. So these are a couple of examples of work by well-known landscape architects in the city. This is the Downtown Parks and Public Realm Plan. And it shows how connected green spaces, how they connect together. And there's a continuous network of natural features and the public realm, and that links large features such as the lake and the islands and the ravine to the great streets, so it all works together. This is probably our most famous intervention here, if you may have heard about it. It's a huge project, probably the largest in the world at this moment in time. And it's recreating a river mouth where it had been artificially connected to the Toronto Harbour. So it's recreating that. It's a multi-year project. It's been about 17 years in the making. And is under the direction, the total control of a landscape architect and the landscape architect that worked for Waterfront Toronto. And it was the idea of Michael Huff over 30 years ago, who was another landscape architect well known in Ontario and Canada, and his paper Bring Back the Dawn. And this is a really good example of how the culture of urban infrastructure must shift from engineering towards ecology and harness the potential of nature-based solutions for resilience, because this work actually incorporates nature and uses the stabilization of plant material as they're in progress to complete the work. So it's often a role for landscape architects to integrate nature-based solutions into the design of the public realm and of rooftops to reduce stormwater impacts at source, create shade, and utilize native species to ensure biodiversity. And Corktown Common is a relatively new park on former industrial lands. It sits on top of a flood protection platform. It features a large marsh that supports plant communities native to the river valley, provides habitat for wildlife, and also becomes an essential part of the ecological stormwater management system. It receives and treats runoff, also designed by a landscape architect, and it also allows for the periodic flooding of the river with an extensive urban prairie on the side that it shares with the river. And also what is important about this part, in order to be a gardener here, you have to take and pass a course on organic gardening, so you really know what you're working with and have respect for that process. Another way landscape architects do this work, and this is borrowing some slides from my colleague Sonia Vangeli, is to build incrementally. So you start out with a pilot, you test some innovative solutions, see if they work, such as paving materials, plant species. And then you practice adaptive management. You see what's working, what's not, and you work with that plant material. This way, your project and your plants have a better chance of surviving. And finally, another important piece is to build capacity and socialize expectations. And that's best done through communications. And this is really building advocacy. So we can write policies, but it doesn't, what really matters is that there's a public opinion out there and advocacy to support the protection of nature, because then they get the ear of the politicians. As a bureaucrat, we can only do so much. We write the ideas, but the politicians make the decisions. So what we have done at the city, and I will have some pieces to share with people if they would like to pick up a copy at the end of the session, is we produced with citizen scientists this booklet. There's 9 of them on different parts. You don't think with a big city there's actually biodiversity exists here, but it does. And this kind of shows school children and people of all ages, and they're extremely popular, especially during COVID, what there is in the city. And and it's alive. You just have to look a bit. We also produced a book called An Enduring Wilderness, and that documents all the natural parklands in Toronto. I know it's a coffee table book, but it's reasonably priced, and it includes poetry and essays written by well-known writers in terms of their celebration of the natural areas. Again, another way to engender natural areas. And actually, Tracy, I'm going to gift this to the IUCN today, so you can have a copy of this booklet. Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Jane. I should run sessions more often. I'm getting a gift. That's fabulous. Thank you on behalf of IUCN. So I think we've had a great series of presentations, starting with what is nature-based solutions, what does it mean, and we had some details on the nature-based solution standards. And then we also had a wonderful walkthrough from Colleen of kind of the opportunities that landscape architecture brings and ways of making sure that this discipline is really called upon and viewed as a key partner in the nature-based solutions equation. Then we had some amazing examples from the city of Toronto, full of biodiversity and some great innovations around green roofs. And that's a stunning figure, the more than 800 million a year in ecosystem services value and benefits. So now we're going to turn over to the moderated panel discussion. So I'm going to invite Heather Tallis to come up to the podium, and or you can stay there, either or, and walk us through a panel discussion. And she's going to make some remarks before that about the exciting work that's going on behalf of the U.S. government.
Great, thank you, Tracy, and thank you all for being here. I am Heather Tallis. I have the honor of working in the U.S. White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as the Assistant Director for Biodiversity and Conservation Sciences. I really appreciated hearing this discussion, all of the background on nature-based solutions and the huge diversity of examples from Toronto. It's really exciting to see, and a really good reminder, as we saw in those booklets, you know, where nature can be in a lot of places that we might not often think about. We have a lot of examples like this in the U.S. as well, of course. Some U.S. federal agencies have been supporting nature-based solutions for decades, but we do seem to be a bit stuck. It seems like we have a lot of examples at a fairly small scale, and nature-based solutions absolutely are not business as usual, as we heard at the beginning of the panel, and we're nowhere near unlocking their full potential. As just one example of that point, in the U.S. we know that natural climate solutions have the potential to provide 1/3 of the greenhouse gas mitigation that we need to reach our national goals for climate change, and we know that right now we are only tapping 1/3 of that potential. And so we're leaving a lot of opportunities, a lot of need on the table that's still not met. So this is a reality that the Biden-Harris administration has recognized and acknowledges, and there really is simply no path to net zero, to our conservation goals, or to equity and resilient communities without nature. So President Biden took a major step towards mainstreaming nature in the United States earlier this year when he signed an Earth Day executive order. That elevated nature-based solutions as a matter of national policy. The President also asked federal agencies to take a hard look at what opportunities we have to do more and to increase adoption of nature-based solutions. And at COP27, we responded to that request with the release of a report on opportunities to accelerate nature-based solutions, a roadmap for climate progress, thriving nature, equity, and prosperity. The QR code on the top there will take you to that roadmap if you'd like to see the details. In that report, the top line message is really that nature-based solutions should be go-to options for climate, equity, and prosperity, and that we know how to get there. In the report, we recognize that nature-based solutions are not business as usual. There are real barriers that still make it difficult to adopt these approaches, and those go across all of the different types of actions that the federal government takes, those barriers and challenges. So we used a collaborative all-of-government process with 15 federal agencies to identify what those barriers are and how they can be removed. The roadmap puts forward strategic recommendations on 5 areas for action that we think, if followed, will go a long ways to unlocking the full potential for nature-based solutions in the United States. The first area for major action is on updating policies. Of course, there are places where we can do more to include consideration of nature-based options in natural resource planning, but also in permitting processes and in economic valuation policies and national accounting. The recommendations there cover the full spectrum of U.S. policy opportunities. The next area for action is in unlocking funding. We think there's a huge opportunity to do more to embed nature-based solutions in core major sector funding, like for infrastructure, and in programs that already exist that can reorient their funding to support nature-based options. Another area for action is to lead with our federal assets. The U.S. government owns and manages 300,000 buildings, which is a lot. And there's a lot more that can be done in those buildings to adopt a lot of the practices that we were just hearing about from Jane. They also manage millions of acres of lands and waters where there are multiple objectives in some cases, and more can be done to foreground the biodiversity benefits and the nature-based options for managing those lands and waters. Another major area for action is enabling the workforce. We heard a lot about this in our interagency process and with the public roundtables and the tribal consultation that we held. So that when funds do flow, we have people skilled to design, finance, build, and maintain nature-based solutions. It's been a real strong emphasis on the reality that a lot of capacity building has been on the environment side, on the design and the the design of nature-based solutions, and not as much on their implementation and maintenance. So a real gap that needs to be filled there. And then finally, we recommended areas for action on research and innovation. We really want to emphasize that we know enough to do much more to act now, but there are still some evidence gaps. For example, there's been a strong translation of evidence into tools on how nature-based solutions can reduce coastal risks, and a lot less on other benefits such as public health or equity. The world is also constantly changing, of course, and climate change being at the foreground of some of those changes, and so we include recommendations to incentivize constant innovation. For more help in thinking about how to act on these recommendations, we also released a Nature-Based Solutions Resource Guide, which is the second QR code on the slide. And that includes 30 stories from U.S. federal agencies and partners about how we have already applied nature-based solutions for a wide range of agency missions and benefits for the American people. It also includes links to over 175 resources that are technical assistance, guidance documents, information resources, and tools that can help people in taking the next step in applying nature-based solutions on the ground. So the United States certainly recognizes that nature is essential to America and to our major priorities. We know we need a quantum leap in adoption of nature-based solutions as critical tools along the path to stopping nature loss, to achieving climate goals, and to righting past injustices. We know we have a strategic path now, as well as knowledge tools to make that happen. So I truly invite you to join us in doing everything that we can to use what we know now and to drive new innovation for nature-based solutions. And now we have an opportunity to do just that in talking more with our panel about how we can drive more adoption and more innovation for nature-based solutions. So I'm going to turn now to our panel and we'll have a couple of questions. So I'll start with each of you, sharing examples and experiences of actually using nature-based solutions on the ground. And we're here at COP15, of course, where there's a big focus on what nations will commit in the post-2020 framework. So I'm curious to hear from each of you what you think national governments, a lot of them represented here on the ground, can do to help drive adoption and make it easier to use these approaches on the ground at local and regional scales. So maybe I'll just go from here and start with you, Liette.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is a very good question. And I should say that there are many possibilities. Working with communities through my work, one thing that I realize is the importance of really getting everybody involved. And this is why my chair is on community sustainability. And so usually I work not only with municipal government, but the local people. So that can be the agriculture sector, it can be the youth, because it's very important, the coastal residents, for example, where you have societal problems. And working with them, trying to find solutions. So involving them in realizing first what's the problem, but also what are the possible solutions. So co-development, co-creation of solution is very important. We have done that in the town of Lincoln, and we were amazed. We used the theory of change to measure what was happening, and we were surprised when we did the last survey at the end of our project that people were adopting already some of the solutions by themselves. They didn't wait for the city or the government to make the decision. They started. I was talking to the mayor just recently, and she's using the same approach right now to do the rest of to really involve even more the town, not only in terms of climate change, but also biodiversity planning and different other components like that. So I think if we understand very well nature-based solution and how it can be a win-win for society and biodiversity, and especially for local authorities, it really helps a lot to get this social acceptability that is needed to make sure that the projects are sustainable. And this is one thing. It's not just a pure one-shot intervention. It takes time. And something that people sometimes don't realize, it's not just put money for 1 year and everything is fixed. That's not the solution. It's a process. It takes time and it's incremental. It's not something that is all, you don't check the box of the assessment sheets. It's a long Excel sheet, I should say. You don't just check the box one by one in a day. You have to really take the process and move it in a way that is positive. You may see that something doesn't work. It's adaptive management. You may have to find another solution. So it's really this question of trade-offs that we have in Criterion 6, for example.
Thank you. So I'm hearing national governments can foster ongoing relationships and communication engagement with local communities who, once informed and empowered, will go a long way on their own.
Exactly. Great. And it's a question of triggering, enabling communities, enabling people to be able to do it. And it can be at different scales. Ideally, you want the largest scale as possible.
Thank you. Colleen, same question.
Well, I agree with you. I think it starts with the national policies because it provides guidance and direction. Canada just released its national adaptation strategy a couple of weeks ago. And I was actually really gratified to have been part of the advisory team for that process because we were able to embed in the strategy words like sustainability, but more importantly, words like transformation. Because what we're up against right now is we need to change the way we think about how a community functions and what a community can do to engage in these kinds of levels. One of the difficulties that exists, and there are many barriers at many levels. In Canada, our national governments don't generally deal directly with municipalities, so there's a problem. Provincial and territorial governments do, but translating from federal then to municipal can become a bit of a hiccup. As well, there are a lot of embedded policies at every step of implementation that have been designed to effectively and efficiently move infrastructure projects and initiatives forward. But they're based on old models. And the difficulty is that if the guiding policy that comes out, say, Infrastructure Canada, or even a municipal policy for procurement does not identify the need for, when a proposal goes out, that we want to see an interdisciplinary team on this. We want to have, yes, engineers, but we also want to have landscape architects. We want to have sociologists. We want to have economists. Then you get a very slimmed down team. So getting the idea, getting the project moving forward, getting the resources to maintain that project over a long period of time are important. And sometimes it's simple. So I'm going to go back in history. When I was a very young landscape architect, I was living here in Ottawa for a couple of years. And one of my clients was one of the water treatment plants who were looking to do an expansion, and they were going to push into the river, and they were going to push into this little lake called Mud Lake, which is sitting in the Ottawa Greenbelt. And there was no management plan for it. So I went looking for why wasn't there a management plan for this lovely little pond. And there wasn't, because it was going to be the site for the off-ramp for the next bridge across the Ottawa River. What to do? So I had a conversation with the pump manager at that water intake treatment facility and asked him how fast, if there was a bridge on those rapids, by his intakes, how fast it would take if a fuel oil truck fell off that bridge in the wintertime for that material to get in his intakes. And he went, and I said, well, we've got a problem, don't we? And he said, we're not having a bridge. So today, 30 years later, Mud Lake is this wonderful little ecological, biodiversity rich reserve in the heartbed of this city. And it just all started by changing that one perspective and the one idea. The thing is that in many communities, many decision makers think they're doing the right thing. They just haven't been brought along to think differently and to see the other perspectives of what's appropriate, but also what's possible. And we do a lot of things that people think are impossible. But we manage to make them possible and cost effective.
Thanks, Colleen. That's a great example. And you touched on many very useful entry points there. The permitting process, we're seeing a lot in the U.S. It's fascinating, right? You think of permitting as environmentally aligned because a lot of permitting was set up to, avoid environmental impacts, but now nature-based solutions have to go through the same permitting process when they're trying to do environmental good. And that can become a barrier. So permitting, interesting. Procurement, you mentioned, something that federal governments have a lot of influence over. And just changing a few words sometimes in those procurement requirements can really, really change what people think of, when they go to make that first decision about what contracting they're going to consider. And then your point on the ground is a perfect one of how I do think these, federal governments have a big role in just giving cover, right? Giving direction, like directional vision of where is it that we're trying to go. And then when you have a conversation like that, it's a point to start the conversation and there's real alignment with what could happen. So thank you for those examples. Jane.
I was going to say, perfect. I think there's three ways that the national government can help. And one is by setting out standards for nature-based solutions for areas where they need them. It might be something that gets embedded in the building code, such as bird-friendly glazing, what that should be. It could be a standard for green roofs. Again, those could be embedded in the building code. The other one is really setting out national guidance on these issues, because a lot of municipalities are small across Canada. They don't have the depth of resources like a city like Toronto or Montreal might have. And so providing that guidance would be very helpful to municipalities at a national scale. And then third, of course, is funding, helping to provide that extra little bit to get it to the matching funding to get us over the hump in terms of incenting actual investment in the nature-based solutions, because they are always not seen as the solution that is going to work in the long term, and there's a lot of pushback against them. In terms of you're preferring to have the simple solution, having a pipe versus the green infrastructure piece. So having that little extra help will really help embed them in the ability of municipalities to actually act on them. But the guidance pieces and the standard pieces are also necessary because you have to be ready to go when you receive national funding. So you have to have that understanding and plan for it before you get the funds to do it.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate you connecting those points up. It is my experience that what gets funded gets done, and so the funding is essential, but also what gets funded gets done. And so if there are not standards and guidance to guide that investment, it may not provide the outcomes that were intended. So thank you for connecting those pieces. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy now for some open Q&A.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks to the panel. So we do have about, my phone just went dark. I think about 6 minutes left to do a bit of Q&A. So yeah, if you think you can be loud, maybe just project, and we'll see if we can do a pass round. But yes, please go ahead. Yeah, all right.
Pierluigi Bozzi, International Coordinator of International University Network on Biodiversity and Cultural Diversity. I appreciate so much your presentations. Two remarks and share the comments and questions. First of all, now we are going to see the new target on urban areas. In this new target, as International Network, we presented some text proposals that was accepted in the first moment. One is the inclusion of infrastructure in the target of urban areas. We know very well, and you know very well, how important it is to consider infrastructures not only in urban areas, but also infrastructures in peri-urban and other areas that affect urban areas. Another fundamental point, it is unfortunately, it is not in the text, it was supported, but anyway, confusion finally, the inclusion in the urban planning of peri-urban and rural areas. It is fundamental to connect and consider in planning the integration between urban, peri-urban and rural areas. Of course, I am happy to see what happens in your context and your comments about. Finally, education. Education is fundamental. We presented a special text that was completely accepted in BBIS about the role of education and as a criteria to take into account, understand and implement all the targets and goals. It's a huge achievement. So education is fundamental. We have to change mindset, but if we don't start with education at all levels, including universities and the role universities can play and the Faculty of Architecture can play in changing mindsets. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you to all the panelists. I had a question about vacant lands and repurposing vacant lands. And if you are aware of some particularly innovative strategies to repurpose them in a way for the best returns for people and nature?
We certainly in Canada have a lot of vacant land. We have a lot of underutilized land. We have a lot of deteriorated land. And in addition to trying to reinvigorate inner cities, so that we grow from the inside, not just from the suburban sprawl concept. It's a big significant component. But there's a lot that can be done on vacant land to create it as a natural asset. I had the privilege of sitting on the final jury for the World Green Cities Awards in July. And one of the award winners here was the Montreal Botanic Garden. They're working on phytotechnology on vacant lands and contaminated lands, not because that's a new technology, but what they were doing was they were presenting in small scale examples of how this kind of work can restore vacant land to make it important biodiversity meadows, to make it, at the very minimum, an attractive natural landscape within a community, so that we stop seeing the vacant land as something that's despoiled and of no use whatsoever. Vacant land is kind of a pet thing with me because I find that if you revegetate it, you give it some purpose, people like to see it, it stops becoming vacant land and acquires a four-letter word, park. And once people start thinking of it as park, then the chances that you're going to see us, like Joni Mitchell said, a supermarket, condo tower, and a swinging hotspot is unlikely to happen on that going forward. So yes, it's a tremendous resource, and we need to be doing more with it, not just within our urban communities, but on transportation, on agricultural landscapes, on industrial landscapes, a whole range of things. Jane, did you?
That's great. We're actually just now at the top of the hour, and I kind of can't think of a better way to end the session except for they pave paradise and put up a parking lot. So let's not do that. Enjoy the rest of your CBD, and please feel free to engage. We'll try and sort of hang out in the back. I know there's other sessions, but if you want to engage with any of us, feel free to do so. And a round of applause, please, for the panelists. Thank you.